Developing people is slow. I wish it was a microwave option. That would be cool. But I think what we found is it's not.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Intentional Churches podcast. And you know, you guys, if you've been listening for any amount of time, you know we're here really to give you practical wisdom and insight into leading your church today and really calling your entire church, your staff, your board, and all of your church members back to personally owning the Great Commission. And if you ever feel uncertain about how to move your church forward or asking questions about that, especially on the topic we're hitting today around future staffing and young leaders, we've got an awesome interview coming at you today. Just a reminder, the ChurchOS assessment helps you gauge kind of where your church is at today and where you need to go tomorrow and really start to identify some action steps. You can check it out by going to the intentionalchurches.com/podcast site, and you can get started taking that assessment today with you and maybe some of your team members. Well, we've got an awesome conversation today, and I'm joined by Paige. And I'm probably going to butcher your last name, but Peltier?
Yeah, Peltier. You don't need to make it complicated.
It's not French then, right?
At one point, I'm sure it was. But
yes, it got Americanized somewhere along the way. Well, Paige, welcome to the podcast. And just for our listeners out there, kind of introduce who you are and maybe a little bit of your ministry background and a little bit of you personally.
Yeah. So I've been married 10 years to my husband, Ben. We are located in the Chicago suburbs of St. Charles, about an hour west of Chicago. We have two little girls that run around our house. Well, one runs, one is only 5 months, but she'll be running soon, Ruthie and Marin. So it's a little bit about me. My role right now at Leadership Pathway is the Director of Candidate Relations. And a little bit about my ministry background. I got my first taste of ministry as an intern at Chapel Street Church in Geneva when I was in college. And I thought, hey, this is really fun and really cool, meaningful work. So I had my first little taste there, graduated with a degree in public relations and leadership studies from Indiana Wesleyan, and started work at the Global Leadership Network, working with recruiting churches to host the Global Leadership Summit. Did that, moved to Arkansas, worked at the University of Arkansas, and then God called my husband and I back to this area to serve with Chapel Street. And I had a lot of different jobs in my 7-ish plus years there, but running residencies and internships, dabbled in small groups, communications, and then my last role was Director of Leadership Development and Staff Culture before stepping off staff. So that's a little bit. I love pickleball, love my neighborhood. Nice. That's a little bit about me.
Yeah, that's great. Well, tell me, two little girls, did you say their ages? How old are they? I have two girls, but I'm almost empty nest. I've got one in college in North Carolina and then another that is going to be a senior.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I've got 4-year-old Ruthie, and then Marin is 5 months. And I had two older brothers, so I never had a sister, but watching the sister bond is so incredibly sweet. So we're really loving that.
Well, congrats on that. Well, let me dig in just a little bit to Chapel Street. And it sounded like you had various roles there. Tell us a little bit about that church and maybe even, I'm curious about some of the role switches. It sounded like there was a lot in there and why that happened. So.
Yeah, so it's a multi-site church in the Chicago suburbs. 4,000 to 5,000 would call Chapel Street their church home, and a very multi-generational staff. And my roles kind of shifted based on kind of my interests and passions and the church's needs and where we were growing. So I started out when I came back on staff. Again, there was like a lot of different iterations, so it gets confusing, but started doing some communication work with my PR degree. We were kind of moving communications in-house at that point as the church was growing. And then when I came back, it was to run our internship program. It already existed, but I got to build on that and grow that, as well as manage social media because I was a millennial and I knew what it was. So why not do that? So I did that for a while, loved building into those young leaders and building that program. And loved this just the chance to give young leaders kind of the taste of ministry that I had through the summer internship. Then started kind of moving into the groups world. Loved that season as well. Also did connections for a time. Again, I feel like it's not uncommon to have multiple hats. And as God was working in me and bringing different things to my attention, that I was like, hey, I think we could grow and lean in here. And I had leaders that trusted me and said, hey, yeah, we see that in you and we want to give you room to run in that space. So yeah, switched to that. Did groups, went on maternity leave, and I actually passed on my groups role to somebody who was graduating at a residency. And I was like, hey, this guy could do it. So he ran with groups and is still running with groups this day, which is incredible. So I came back and led him for like a couple days after maternity leave. And I was like, you've got this. And that's when they started the conversations with me of like, hey, Paige, if you leaned into staff culture and leadership development, how would you feel about that? And I was like, well, that would be a dream. So let's do it.
Well, I think the reason I wanted to push into it a little bit is already in this season of the podcast, we've had a couple of these kind of conversations about the changing kind of environment of the way to think about culture, especially in a team, and staffing, which is for anybody who's from the older generation, isn't that normal to hop around spots? But it seems like there's an emerging trend, and I want to get your thoughts on it, that the churches who are really developing young leaders have a Drew Moore from Canyon Ridge, in my home church here in Vegas, used this phrase a lot, trying to find your best contribution instead of a more siloed, become the expert in spiritual development or small groups, and you do that for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years. And so I'm seeing this trend in the church. I'm wondering, for our listeners, are you aware that is shifting? Like a lot of churches are not like that. Like you stay in the same role for years and years and years and on end, and eventually maybe retire in that role. And are you aware of the trend, I would say? And then I would ask you, why is this so important to the younger generations that you are able to develop and morph around? So anyway, you seeing it out there?
Yes, totally. I mean, yeah, for sure in my own story. And again, understanding one, how I'm wired and the things that God's putting on my heart and where he's leading me, and leaders who knew that and walked close enough with me to hear that and trusted me enough to give me those responsibilities. And I think that's a trend. That's a great way to keep these younger leaders, is that there's flexibility in the role. And I think you're right. I think it was like, yep, I'm the small groups pastor until I'm not. But I think now with millennials and with Gen Z, just that flexibility, the nimbleness of, hey, we care about you as a person and we care about what God's doing in your life. And yeah, we want to unlock that. We want to bring forth the best part of you, what God's doing in you, and how that can contribute to, the Lord's work in this church and in this body in this season. And just being realistic about it. I'm a big proponent of seasons and reevaluating. And just because it worked great for a couple years doesn't mean that's where I need to lock in forever. Like, let's continually assess and sense, hey, is this, my best contribution, or is it going to be somewhere else in this season? What does the congregation need? What holes do we see? But it allows people to want to stay because they feel known, they feel recognized, that their contribution matters, and so that they can grow. They can grow. And I think, again, as a disciple, it's like, if I'm the same person I was 3 years ago, that's not great. Like, the Lord should be working in my life and in my heart and shaping me. And again, you can grow in one role for sure. I'm not saying you can't, but don't doubt the fact that God may be, hey, let's think about this. Let's move into this area. So yeah, I think, spot on. Definitely a trend I would see.
We are definitely seeing the shift. And I just, for our listeners who maybe aren't there yet, we'll talk a little more about practical, like what is a first step you could take. But I want to encourage any listeners out there who's thinking this way. We're not as locked into these siloed roles, and people go on a journey better. And I think about my own story, that's how I was developed. Like I got a chance to lead with Chick-fil-A at a very young age, very young. Like I'm still to this day, I'm like, why would they let me like I had a store at 21. I had like 50 some employees at 21 years old. It's like, but that's where I got my lessons of life. And sometimes I think in church, we expect people to have arrived before we'll place them in instead of having this developmental mentality. Okay, we're going to switch gears. You mentioned leadership pathway. Some of our listeners very familiar, longtime friends, Dave and Kristen Miller, and we have huge belief in them and refer them often. But some of our listeners aren't familiar with leadership pathways. So, Paige, would you give just kind of the background of leadership pathway, what it does, kind of how it was born, and what was the really driving force behind the early stages of its development?
Yeah, and little nod to Dave and Kristen. And I always joke with them. I'm like, once you are a friend of Dave and Kristen Miller, you're a friend for life. Like they know a lot of people and track with a lot of things that are going on. And I appreciate that in them. So leadership pathway, what we do, this is a great question because my mom asked me it the other day.
Oh, yes.
So I was like,
Mom question.
okay, yeah, let me give you kind of my elevator pitch, how I kind of boil it down. But I say Leadership Pathway is an organization, and we're committed to helping develop leaders for the local church. The primary way we do that is through 2-year residency programs where you're embedded in a local church, where you're getting meaningful ministry experience and intentional coaching. So that's the bulk of what we do. And for when I'm talking to a candidate, what I say is our goal is at the end of those 2 years, you're hireable and highly desired in your ministry area of choice. And how we get there is meaningful ministry experience and intentional coaching. And we don't just match candidates with churches and say, hey, I hope it goes well. I hope you learn everything you need to. We walk alongside our church partners throughout that process. 1, to identify, to find that leader, and 2, to coach the people who are leading the resident. So you may have your youth pastor who's leading a resident. And so we would be connecting with that youth pastor and just walking alongside and checking in and keeping our eyes on the goal of, hey, if we want this person to be hireable and highly desired at the end of 2 years, what do they need to know? What do they need to experience? How can we help them understand themselves better to grow in that? So that's kind of the elevator pitch, if you will, of the main work that Leadership Pathway does in our residencies. And then you asked kind of where it started, what the need was there, the driving force behind it. And again, Dave and Kristen, co-founders, I would say, kind of they saw the need kind of on both sides of a coin. They saw this church staffing need is always and constant. And where are our new leaders and how can we find them? So they saw that side of things. And then working with young adults at a Christian college, they saw young adults driven for ministry and they wanted to launch into ministry, but they were hitting roadblocks. And again, I talk to these candidates regularly and they say, every job I look at says I need 2 to 3 years of experience. And where am I going to get that? And that's where residency is such a felt need for those candidates and for the churches. And so the churches get to kind of build this farm team mentality. I think every church staff would love to operate like Major League Baseball, which I know not a lot about, but to have a farm team, to be able to say like, hey, yeah, we've got younger ministry leaders that are learning and growing and practicing. And so we can call them up when the spot is open, when they're ready. So every staff wants that, and every young leader going into ministry is looking for the opportunity. They're looking for to be built into, to be developed. And so that's where Leadership Pathway was born, out of those two kind of felt needs, both from the young leaders' perspective and the church's perspective. It's not easy, it's messy, but I think all the good things are.
Somewhere along the line, in my lifetime, churches did this kind of regularly. They developed young people, spoke into them potential in ministry, and somewhere along the line, it seemed like we lost it. I don't know if you have an opinion about it, but I'm old enough to go, was it really becoming a mega church where we had more money and resources and we thought we could just go microwave and hire already developed talent, ministry talent, and so we just stopped developing? I'm not sure. Do you have an opinion about why did we get, not every church, there's a lot of churches out there doing this well. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I'm wondering, do you have a take on why we went away from this?
Yeah, I think you're spot on with kind of the mega church model. We could buy it. So if we can buy it, let's buy talent, or let's buy that process. And I think the core of that is busyness. And so again, whatever church size you are, you're busy. Sunday is always coming. You've got all these programs and events and ministries, and developing people is slow.
Yes. When you said 2 years and my jaw dropped, I was like, there's already some people going, I don't have 2 years. What are you talking about? No, how much money is that going to cost me? And,
Totally. But it's slow. It's doing life. It's walking alongside. I wish it was a microwave option. That would be cool. But I think what we found is it's not. And so again, we'll talk about this. I'm sure we'll get into it, but you've just got to start. You've got to start somewhere and start doing it, because it's a long process to develop these young leaders. Yeah. And I think we've gotten busy. So I think that's kind of the core piece it's not, developing people isn't as flashy as throwing a big event or a ministry with, this many people were there. It's squishy. And so squishy things don't get as much attention of hey, yeah, this leader is way more self-aware, or this leader can manage details now. That stuff's harder to celebrate and harder to notice. So that would be my hunch.
Yeah, that's really good. Great observations. And I do believe this next era of church, this is residency, and what you all are doing is non-negotiable for any church who's committed to reaching people in their communities and growing through relational evangelism and disciple making. It's a non-negotiable. You have to prioritize and do this going forward, because at the end of the day, when I was an executive pastor years ago, we had never heard of headhunters. I call them headhunters. I probably shouldn't say that. It's probably derogatory. Search firms. Let me say it more better. Search firms like Slingshot and Vanderbilt. I would have never imagined that one day we might pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to do a search in a pool that admittedly by those guys is shrinking. They don't have as many candidates that they can go get. They're doing a great job with what they have, but it really is reinforcing a little bit this microwave mentality that I can pay somebody and go find the position. And I'm not guilt tripping anybody that does that. We've done it in my home church a few times. So it's more, I'm trying to hit with our listeners. This is a must. You have to start this. If you're not doing it, if you're doing it, you can't cut it off. You've got to fund it. You've got to give time to it along the way. And I live in Vegas. And I look at Vegas, which most people, only see the Strip, but Vegas does this in spades. My daughter plays on a flag football team here in Vegas, and last year one of the graduates went into an electrician apprenticing program. She's already making, as a high school graduate, $90,000 as an apprentice, and will be soon graduated up through their cycle. So anyway, all that I want to come back to. An important topic for a lot of our listeners, and that is, what are you seeing and learning about Gen Z leaders that you could give advice to our listeners on both ends? If you're a boomer or Gen X leader in a church, what would you say to them about, here's what we're learning about Gen Z leaders? And then Gen Z, Millennial, like what would you say to them? So kind of two topics of the, two sides of the same coin, asking you on your advice.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say to kind of the older generations, I think Gen Z specifically, I've noticed recently, they're on fire for Jesus and for reaching their peers for Jesus, which is so incredible. I walk away from some of my interviews with these young candidates just like, let's go. Like that is so thrilling and exciting. So I think there's so
That
much.
may be a
Yeah.
shock to some of our listeners, like that they're on
Oh,
fire with relational evangelism. Like,
oh, totally. They are. They are. And so that's so encouraging. And they need people to, yeah, to take them under their wing and to show them. I would say again to those older leaders, you can't just show how ministry is done. You also have to tell, and you can't just tell how ministry is done. You also have to show. Those things go hand in hand. And again, it takes time and work. But I think as you're leading those younger leaders, don't just assume, well, I told them, like, this is how it should go. No, they need to see you do it too. And same thing. If like, well, they watched me, I thought they figured it out. No, like also tell them. Like both of those I think are really important. And they crave feedback. That's a trend I'm sure people have talked about, but it just keeps becoming more and more prevalent. And I think in feedback, there's multiple layers to that. Some of it is affirmation. They want affirmation and they need support. They want you to tell them like, hey, that was great in this piece, but here's where we could grow. Here's where things could be better. So they're hungry for that. So I would say those are just some things to notice, to celebrate about the younger leaders and to notice. And then I would say to Gen Z and to our younger leaders, have patience and you move fast. I think it's taking the older generation's time in proximity with these younger leaders to kind of adjust to that pace, to understand and to celebrate, to value the things that they're bringing to the team and not to think like, oh, I just don't understand, but just to be patient with the older generations as they get to know you and to glean their wisdom. That was one of my favorite things I got to do on staff. I felt like as a millennial, I kind of could be a bridge for our younger leaders and our more senior leaders and get them in a room together. That's some of my favorite ministry memories is kind of thinking of, I would do these kind of brain trusts where our pastor of leadership development, who had been the lead pastor for a bunch of years, and young leaders who were on fire, we just got in the room together and talked and asked questions. And so when you can make those bridges to bring people together to learn and grow from each other, that is gold. And I think that's how we're going to grow, to pass on that wisdom, pass on that insight to that generation, and then to learn from them as well.
That's great advice on both ends and a doable step. Because a lot on the podcast, we try to get to practical, doable steps. And I think both of the things you said there, especially creating the space in meetings just to have conversation between the older and younger generations, is good. Well, before I ask this next question, I want to give our listeners some context for Leadership Pathway. I don't know how to ask this question the best way, but give us a ballpark number of the amount of churches you've worked with maybe or working with currently and the amount of residents. Just some context before I get into this. We always like to get into what churches are really doing a great job at something, but I want our listeners to hear there is some scope behind what you guys are doing out there and what you're learning. So,
yeah, first, the context I need to give you is I'm terrible with numbers. Numbers kind of fall out of my head. But we're working with, I would say, around 80 to 100 churches in some form or another, some who have residents who have graduated, have gone through their 2 years, some who are just starting the conversation with us of, hey, we want to do this. What does it look like? And then on the flip side, again, I should know this number and maybe we can edit it in at some point, but
Now, give us your best ballpark.
I want to say last year we launched maybe 40 residents into residencies, 40-ish, 40 to 50. And that's on top of the existing probably 30 or so that were already in residency at that time. So again, kind of around 100 residents, 100 churches-ish. Dave's going to be like, Paige, you got these numbers totally wrong, but
It'll be all right. They will be fine.
it'll be fine.
So let me get into, do you have an example of a few, maybe even just a couple churches who are really cranking out residents now? And then secondarily, what is different about them versus a church maybe that's onboarding right now that's new to it all? Like what's the differentiation? But start out with, can you give us a really practical couple of examples of churches killing it with residency?
Yeah. The one that comes to the top of my head right away is Skyline in La Mesa. They have been intentional about young adults. And so from that has developed this incredible ground for residency. And so they have a lot of young leaders who are already involved and invested in what they're doing at Skyline and are like, I think I'm calling to ministry. And they have leaders who are saying that and seeing that and spotting that and inviting them in. And it looks across the spectrum from classic kind of Bible college graduates to high school graduates who have just been serving and doing a job that is then funding their ministry habit. And so they've been intentional at noticing, inviting, pouring in resources and time to young adults. And so they're gravitating to Skyline and are excited to be unleashed and developed. And so Tony and his team there are doing a really great job. So that's what I would notice.
Is this Skyline in you said La Mesa, California, San Diego?
Yes.
Like Skyline
Mm-hmm.
Wesleyan?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm not sure our listeners would have known that or guessed that.
There you go.
Residency. Yeah. And how many years do you just estimate? How many years have they been committed to residency?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure they have graduates at this point. So at least 3 years they would be invested in kind of young adults in residency. Probably 3 years in, and they're like booming at this point. So there's a lot of residents knocking on the door of like, hey, yeah, let me learn, let me grow.
That's hopeful for me. 3 years in, booming.
Good.
Yeah. And maybe one or two more.
Yeah, well, and one more point about that I've noticed, they've had their residency program has been a great tool when they've had candidates apply for their kind of full-time roles that just aren't ready yet. They went with somebody with a little bit more experience, but they're like, hey, we want you to be in our residency program. And so they're able to tell candidates who are just not quite ready yet, we want you on the team, but here, come in, do the residency program. And once they realize, like, they learn more about it, they're like, actually, this is exactly what I want to do. This is perfect for me. So that's encouraging. On the flip side, I would say churches that aren't turning out residents are just too busy. They're trying to get all their ducks in a row, as I would say. And so, that piece takes time. I would say the ducks are really never in a row.
Right.
And you can't wait until they are. But that would be the biggest hurdle is like, oh, we want to make sure we've got like everything kind of lined up. But there's totally an element of residency that is building the plane while you're flying it. And so, and again, regardless of size, we see smaller churches who are steadily invested in this and are launching leaders. And but then again, small churches and big churches who are waiting to get their ducks in a row.
Well, I'm hearing this message loud and clear. Like the prioritization is the key. You've got to prioritize starting and embrace the mess. That's what I'm hearing you say over and over again.
Oh, totally.
Don't just, and busyness, which is something with IC, we would say the same thing. If you're driven primarily by silver bullets and programmatic thinking, people will always be a lower priority. The development of people will always be a lower priority if you're committed to those things. So I think those messages are really helpful to hear. And you started alluding to this already, but I know a question I get asked all the time is sourcing. Where are residents coming from? With a lot of Bible colleges not really turning out that many ministry students anymore. And some, like in the background I'm from, the Bible colleges have all closed and are trying to figure out a new model of what to become. And for many years, Bible colleges produced a lot of ministry candidates. So for our listeners, help them understand where they're being resourced from. You alluded to Skyline a little bit, but where are they coming from, residents today?
Yeah. So in our data, what we've found is we source about 60% of the residents that we place, and 40% of the residents that are placed are sourced from that church. So, and I talk with people all across the spectrum. I feel like this is going to be kind of an annoying answer, but they're like right there. They're in your church. They are there, but you have to find them and notice them. But I talk with the classic Christian college grad. I talk with people who have done the education track to the end and are graduating with their MDiv and are looking to get the real ministry experience now. So we talk with them. We talk to second career people who have said, hey, I've managed a restaurant, but I have been serving at the church and I feel called to this. This is what I think I want to do, but I need experience. So we talk to people like that. We talk to the young adults who are working a couple jobs and volunteering, but then their volunteering becomes more and more and more. And they're like, this is what lights me up. This is what gets me excited and fuels my day. And so those church leaders are noticing those people and are saying like, hey, have you considered ministry? And starting those conversations. So one of my favorite questions I ask in an interview is, tell me, are there people who spoke into you, who said, hey, you should consider ministry? Tell me about those conversations. And just hearing their stories of, yeah, my youth pastor from when I was a freshman said, hey, you're a leader, you could do this. And it's their small group leader, it's their parents' friend. You just never know. And so I just love hearing those stories of who are the people who are calling you out, who noticed you, who said, who kind of, planted that seed and put that in your mind. It's their parents, it's their coach, their FCA leader. So that's always fun to hear. And so that's what I would encourage people listening and watching to kind of think about. What's your sphere of influence? Who are the people you're around? And who do you need to have a coffee with and say, hey, I see this in you. Have you thought about ministry? What would that look like?
That's
Yeah.
incredibly practical. And I know it sounds so like you said, listeners may not like it because it's not the fast fix or the microwave, but it's going back to, we yell this from the mountaintops. We got to get back to the basic blocking and tackling. And somehow we've forgotten, this is how many of us who are older have gotten into ministry. Dale Harlow spoke into me. My youth pastor spoke into me. And then another mentor, when I was with Chick-fil-A, spoke into me, the potential. And whether they believed it was truly there or not, I'll never know. But it's the power of the human experience of somebody doing that. And I think it's just a good advice for leaders to slow down and make sure you have these kind of meetings on your calendar where you're engaging in people's stories and feeling out what God may be doing in their lives. Well, we're getting ready to wrap up, but we always try to give practical things, tips. And I really like to put a short window. Like, think about next week. If listeners are on here, maybe they're new to residency or thinking about it, or they've been trying to get their ducks in a row, or they've been doing it for a while. Are there any practical tips you would give that they could do in the next week or so to kind of get themselves rolling or continue the momentum around residency?
Yeah, I love making things practical too. So I love this question here, and I'll answer that question with a question. But that's kind of what I would challenge people to do is kind of think about an audit of your team, of your church, by answering this question. If all the boomers and Gen X on your team if they won a 1-month cruise, what would happen to ministry? What would happen to your church in that month? If they all won the cruise, some people say like if they got hit by a bus, which I'm like, no, we're not doing that. We're going on a cruise.
That's the older generation. We always say if you get hit by a bus, what would happen? Right. You're all like, they went on a cruise.
The twist on the hat. I want you to be having a good time on a cruise. So, but evaluate your team. If all the boomers and Gen X of our team, we won a cruise and we all had to go, who's still here? Who's around? Who can preach? Who can lead the groups? Who can, manage the finances? Who can make sure payroll goes out? Like all these little details of like, do we have people that we're training to do these things? Are they around? And if they're not, if you're like, we would be in trouble, we would have fun on that cruise, but the church would be like, wait, what? Mm-hmm. I would encourage you to plant some seeds. So I would say, this week, buy a young adult coffee, buy a key volunteer a coffee, and have that conversation. Hey, I see this in you. I value your contribution. I value what you're doing. Would you want more of it? Would you be interested in growing what you're already doing as a volunteer? Or, as a staff member, what's keeping you? What's challenging you? How are you growing? So that's my $5 practical tip of what you could do in the next week. Yeah.
Paige, thank you for taking the time to do this. It's been a great conversation and a very timely one. So thank you for this,
thank you.
Time. And thank you for listening to the Intentional Churches podcast. And we always say this, but if this podcast has been helpful to you, would you please leave a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcast? This it helps IC, but more importantly, it helps more and more church leaders. We're now at about 1,000 churches in the IC network and movement of churches. It helps more and more churches on board. And we believe the future of IC is really centered around this idea of the great collaboration between leaders like Paige and others. So if you'd leave us a rating and review, that'd be great. And remember, you can take the ChurchOS assessment to gauge where your church is today and know what next steps to take. Visit intentionalchurches.com/podcast to get started. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.